I guess I'll probably be opening it up to some question stuff later on, but I'll start with the title. So the show is called View from My Bed, and some of you who know me well will know where that's coming from. For those of you who don't know me very well yet, the end of 2014, I had a severe concussion, which left me really kind of unable to walk much or read or drive. So I was really being taken care of by my family. And I was in bed for the majority of 2015. And I don't remember the first half of it that well. My brothers will tell you because they'll tell me things I said the first half, and I'm in complete denial about it. So it was a lot of just being still and being on your back and being in a bed. And when your whole world really is shrinking and you're not the physical realm, the perimeter of it, it was an interesting experience. By the time I hit a few months in, that I was realizing that my world was expanding, but in a different direction. So it started to go downward and a bit more dense into moments because I couldn't leave really or do much. And so opening my eyes hurt, but when I was able to open my eyes, I was really just seeing light in very specific ways. And so it got to the point where usually by the time you realize something, it's been happening for a while. And so I realized probably a few months in that I had gotten to the point where I knew what time of day it was by how the light was situated on the wall. And then it got to the end of the year and I realized that I knew what time of day it was on the wall with different seasons. And so seasons kept coming and going. And I think it was, I'd hit my head in November. And by January, I was still pretty much immobile. And my mother was lovely. And she was reading me an article where she's like, I think it says that symptoms can, because we're trying to figure out, like, they tell you concussions, go into a room, stay in there for a week, let it be dark. And it wasn't fixing it. And so I didn't really know what to do. And so in January, she's like, I think symptoms can last like up to a year in a way that I think was supposed to be hope giving. And I just broke down and I was like, I can't do this for a year. I won't make it. And so it was like that moment where you realize like you're kind of at rock bottom and you're at the end of your rope. And so you really don't have any other place, you don't have any other choice. So you can't go anywhere, you can't go down further. And my personality changed, and I'm generally a very joyful person. And that is like my reserve and my resource. And that went away, where I realized I'm the same person, but my personality has shifted, my joy is gone, but I don't really know what to do. But the sun keeps coming up. And so we're just gonna lay here. And so the depression was really hard because I'm not generally a depressed person. And so I've had stages in my life where I've had that. So it was a new feeling and a new depth. And so, yeah, it was really trying to figure out how I was existing and not feeling like I was actually living. And I was taken care of. So it took me a lot to realize kind of like your pride gets hit a lot when you realize you're not actually living because of anything that you're doing. And people are taking care of you. People are bringing you food. People are bringing you to the doctors. People are helping you pay for things. People are helping you find a job of a certain amount of hours that you can still have an income, and they're driving you to and from it. And when you're not at work, you're just laying in bed. And so I would try, when I was awake, would try to read poetry, and I would try to memorize it so that when I couldn't read, I would have it in my head. And so I would sit there and I would read different passages and memorize different passages. And so that, and you'll notice with a lot of the titles are all very poetic. In that poetry informs my life in a lot of ways because it is very ambiguous. But you also don't really know, it doesn't lend itself to knowing very well. It's more of a language of understanding. And that's what I love so much about it. And with art, I was trained as a draftsman, so I would draw very realistically in graphite, and generally figures of humans and people that I knew. And I was not bad at it. And when I hit my head, the perception had been shifted. And so I realized when I would go back and visit some drawings I had done at that time, the drawings of someone's face would be very good, but they would be at a complete slant. And so I was seeing everything just to the left of where everything was, which is part of why it was so hard to function. And so that slowly started coming back. But then I realized as I was like going on in my artistic journey and able to go back to university, that I was less interested in drawing people in order to tell their stories, and I was more interested in what their stories were and like how honest I could get something. And so I realized like there's this beautiful, and people will hear me, there's this gorgeous Soul LeWitt quote that I've carried with me since then, where basically a drawing of an apple isn't a real apple, but a drawing of a line is a real line. And that really propelled me into this realm where I was looking at material for what it was. And so then you're looking at furniture for all the baggage that it carries with it. You're looking at, for me, gold for all of the cultural references it's bringing with it. And so I started looking at objects and materials and things in the objecthood or the thinginess of things because of how they're lending themselves to tell a story. And so that shifted a lot my whole practice. And so there's not one representational drawing in the show. And so I use, as you can tell, most of my stuff is using charcoal and gold. And I love domestic objects. And so I will tell it. So I use golds for those of you who might not be familiar, but in art history and culturally, really just regardless of art history, just historically, gold is the material of truth or of absolution or the divine, and that's why you'll see it in a lot of paintings. The reason for that is because it can't be destroyed, and so it only changes form. So I love it because if you're trying to test it and you're trying to melt it, you're trying to put it to these things that these processes of violence or of pain, it doesn't go away. And it just will mold itself. It will either melt if you're giving it heat. If you're pulverizing it, it will go into powder. And so I love the fact that I'm able to use a material that's been in the earth and has withstood so many moments of violence to get it to where it is. And it does that across time and era and cultures. And I love it. It also holds light really, really beautifully. And so it's a stand-in for light in a lot of different ways for me. I'll talk about charcoal before I tell you why the forms are the way they are. But materially, so all of my black paintings are a mixture of sumi ink and charcoal. The charcoal that I have is from charred homes that have burned down in the state of Colorado. And so I've gone around and I've collected all of these timbers and I pulverize them. So I try to do it by hand with like a mortar and pestle. And again, that process of destroying something and pushing it, but I don't want to put it in the blender. I want to sit with it and hold it and let it be a violent act, but also let it be an act that's bringing healing into my life, where I'm sitting with things and everything feels observed. And so all of so ink is the same thing, it's derived from charcoal. So even if I'm getting it into the studio in that state, it is still coming from a material that was something else before it was burned. And it's living a completely different life in a different form, but it's still that material on a molecular level. And so it carries with it memory of the materials of what it's always been. And so it just lends itself to understanding how much stillness teaches us lessons that seem really simple, but they go really, really deep. And so in that sense, most of my stuff is situated, if you are an art person, are historically within It's tangential to minimalism or a minimalist tradition. And in that, what I mean is that I'm using very simple forms. I'm using just like, I'll create with like this piece, just something that's gold, in order for you to force yourself into a state of introspection. There's nothing else to look at other than gold. So you have to ask yourself, well, what is gold? And it has this skin-like texture when it's on it. And the longer it's on whatever object I've put it on, it starts to take on the texture of the other material. So it starts to pull the grain from the wood, or it starts to pull if it's metal underneath it, all of the nuances and the imperfections that are of that other material. And so it feels like a skin. It feels very much like an encasing. And if for me in general, I love trying to figure out how you can baptize our ordinariness into something that feels sacred, because it is. And I think we get so caught up in our lives feeling ordinary that we lose how powerful our ordinariness is and how we get whispered to in moments of light. And so, yeah, it's really, I mean, ultimately, I'm interested in pain. I have it, I don't like it, I live alongside it, and it teaches me quite a lot, because it's also a privilege to have pain, in that it acts as an access point or an entry point into other people's stories and other people's healing. And sometimes, at least for me, you don't really realize that you need permission to honor your pain, and it's worth being put up on a pedestal with the same emotions of joy and the same experiences that we have that fill our lives and feel very full, because we wouldn't really know how good those are without those pain. And it makes us wiser people and more empathetic if we let it. But I think that that's where stillness comes in. So almost all my stuff is very simple in form, so that you're able to sit in moments of stillness, to keep asking, what are things? And how can this teach me something? Or how is it holding light? And so, yeah, I mean, so the eggshells, which a lot of you might know, are, they represent like the origin of life. And so to use a material that is very ordinary, and we have it in you'll see it with these specifically, because they're chicken eggshells. And so they're in all of our refrigerators, and they have the origin of life attached to them. But to break them, to have a material that has life and death in it in one single thing that feels very fragile. I'm also very allergic to eggs, which I found out when I was making the first iterations of these sculptures, because I was down a few years ago at a residency, and I was making them by myself. And so I had to crack all the eggs and clean out the membrane and everything in it and let them dry before I would leave. And it took me, I did quite a bit of them. And I was saying, I'm like, I feel really sick. And I couldn't figure out what it was until someone put that together for me. And I was like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to do these, because if I can't touch them, then without being very aware of my own brokenness and my own sickness and my own vulnerability to these benign objects, I don't know how I'm going to do it. So then I was trying to figure out like different types of precautions of either wearing gloves or getting other people to help me I'd crack them and they would wash them out for me. So then it actually kind of became this performance of me reliving healing and me being broken and not able to actually do the work, and someone else coming in and doing the work for me and healing it and being willing to do that because they knew what I was making and respecting it, even though they didn't really understand exactly what I was trying to do. And so the fact that it was such a dependent performance, and it held so much in it, that felt really sacred in honoring someone else and just by being present. And so I guess for me, is a lot of it is really trying just to figure out, can art help me navigate pain? And if it can help me and help me heal, can it help other people? And what it looks like to even be able to become more vulnerable people, where we can all honor each other's pain and see each other as humans and broken vessels, and as sacred because we're broken. And so yeah, it's been a really long journey. But so that's with the eggshells, a lot of them, and holding them in vitrines, which again, I mean, one of them, the square one here, is called Hold Me. And so a lot of it feels like a cry out for when you are just broken and have nothing left. It's 3 shells, the primary shells, and one's 24 karat gold, which feels like that sacred part of our brokenness. And the second one in between has got, if you look at it, it's got a lot of veining on the surface. And so it's all of these signs of life that was being held in the egg before it was deemed as just an egg. And then the last one, which is completely white and feels like porcelain or ceramic to me. But yeah, just putting those things in relation to each other in conversation, feel like how we can at least try to navigate what it looks like to have our ordinary moments be really dense and really full and sacred in some way. But yeah, so there's a lot of different things. All that to say, I had the privilege. So I got a DM. I met Kyra and Drew like 3-4 years ago when I was doing a performance for Meiningers, which JD knows since he asked me to do it. And where I would draw, it's called a Sit With Me project. And basically I was trying to figure out how I could basically make people realize that they were valuable just by being themselves and through a performance. And so I would have people come and sit because I was trained representationally. I can draw portraits. And so I would have them come, like, if you sit with me, I'll give you a free portrait. And so through those, it was really a facade of just trying to get people to have a conversation with a stranger with me. And people will do a lot of things if you tell them if you're giving away something free, especially if it's art. So I would get them to come and sit with me and for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and the experiences I had with men that had been traveling, hitchhiking their way across town, that would tell me their life story and start crying in the middle of a public park. That catch you off guard. And so you start to realize how much people just need to be seen and held. And so you figure out how, just as an artist, start to ask yourself, how can I do that? Either visually or through performance or through just being a human and on the streets with people. And so through that, I met Kyra and Drew. He was performing that night. And so we kind of had kept tabs. I had lunch with Kyra like a few months later. And Drew reached out to me this year asking if we could collaborate. And I was like, absolutely. Do I know what we're going to do? No, but we should meet. And so we met up, and I had no paper to like take notes. So I like roll out this like brown paper bag and we take notes on. And he starts like telling me like, well, this is going to be the hurts for like how you can like actually activate healing in the human body. And I'm just sitting there like I'm at a lecture hall. And I loved it, and learning so much about a form of art that is the most abstract that you can get, but it touches people in general on the most visceral level where they don't realize it's touching them. And so that between that conversation, I've been making pieces. This show was going to be originally something else a year and a half ago. And so it had a different title, and it was called A Placed Comma, and it was about understanding, becoming aware of our awareness in a lot of different regards. And I realized basically my work was about pain, and Jasmine helped me with that. I had a show there up in the spring, and that kind of, I was realizing that the work was good, but I was also moving away in some ways into something that felt very different. And I wasn't sure where that was going. And I had made a sister piece to hold me through a residency in Berlin this summer. And I realized, I got a lot of good feedback, and I realized it was just very honest in how I felt in being broken and being held in something that felt very transparent, but yet couldn't be touched or accessed. And so I just kind of, Gandhi was lovely. She's like, hey, can I have the title for the show? And I was like, 2 months later, I'm like, I have the title. It's not going to be a thing. And I'm like, so I sit there and I email her. I'm like, I didn't tell her I changed. I'm like, I'm completely just going to, on a whim, change the title. and I changed it from a place comma to a view from my bed. And I left to go visit family that summer. And when I was there, I realized that the whole work's going to have to change because it's not at all what the show is about anymore. And so basically, from mid August to now is when almost all of this was made. And so it came from such an honest place that it was very therapeutic and healing. But I went through a journey of understanding how sacred my tears were over the summer, and that it was okay to cry, and that it was actually allowing myself to heal as well as other people. And it helped a lot. But that between that journey, just a lot of things coinciding in one thing is where this came out of. And Drew having texted me alongside that, we had meetings where he was like, I don't know what's going to be, but it has to be something about pain and beauty. So can you do a composition? And he was like, ideal. I asked him, I think, like, what is like ideally like the length of time in a sound or a score or a song that you could get someone to sit for? And he was like, and he laughed, he's like, a half hour. And I'm like, okay, then you can do a half hour. And so we ended up coming, he's like, after 15 minutes, it takes about that long for someone to sit into themselves and to actually know, to let everything kind of go to the wayside and for them to be still. And so we shot for over 15 minutes and we got to 19. All that to say, the sound for the whole exhibition is incredible. And if I could I have you come up, Drew, and talk for like 2 minutes about the whole score? Because it's really incredible if you guys haven't listen to it.
Yeah, so yeah, well, there's a lot of people here. So what's actually funny when you were saying that is I remember you were asking me, you're like, well, could you do something about stillness? And I was like, well, yeah, like that's that's like for me is like that's what ambient music is. It's about having that moment to yourself and having that moment to completely just reflect and get into a certain mindset where it's just you in your head, and sometimes that's scary to a lot of people, and I feel like oh, I think that's scary to everybody, but I I think when it comes to having a little bit of that background music and that background noise, you're able to meditate and you're able to relax and calm down for anything that's going on, any type of stress or any type of situation that you're going through. For me, for the music, it was I had Ashley come over to my studio, and I was like, well, I have I have like a little idea, I have like a little melody, and so I just want to see where we can go with it. And so I played a little melody loop, and that's what I do. I have a bunch of pedals that I'm obsessed with, and it's I create an initial loop, and then I take it on this. I mean, I take it on this journey, and it basically folds things. And this song, I wanted it to be something that was going to have like a few phases to it. And so when you listen to it, and I know that it's difficult for a lot of people to listen to an 18-minute song, or like 19-minute song, but for if you ever do actually listen to it, it goes it goes in a direction where for myself, I reflected so much with this view from my bed title and the entire idea. When Ashley sent me the narrative, I read it, and it hit home big time. I was very emotional, and I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease right when I turned 30 in 2020, and that has been affecting me. And it's still, and it's going to affect me probably for the rest of my life. But the thing about it was, at the time when that happened, I was my ugliest self, and I was ugly to other people, and the people who were closest to me, and the people who I love very much, and I never would want to be that way or do anything like that. But when you're in so much pain and you're pouring out so much energy into something, like your body is just it, it's it's completely spent. And so I I really connected with this entire concept. And so I was just really privileged, I feel like, to do this. And like for you to ask me to do this is like is, I don't know, it just means a lot to me, because this is something that is still going on in my life. And it's funny because it's like I just had my infusion today. Like I come over here, and it's like I'm like I was, listening to the music. Even I was just reflecting on, some of the things that I'd like to say, and I was like writing all these notes down. I was like, well, like I can think about some of those things and everything, but it means a lot more when you're just kind of saying it right there, right then and there. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing right now, not looking at notes. But um, for the music, what it does is it goes through a dwelling for a, I would say probably 7 to 8 minutes of a soundscape in which there's a few phases to it. It goes into like a trench, and I call it a trench because it's it's a little darker. It's kind of a darker sound. It's a little more bass, like sustaining throughout the song, and that is kind of the main that's like the main point in which when I make all my ambient music live, I get into this meditative state, and it's because I'm reflecting on the things that are hardest. And so then when I'm getting out of it and I start to change things, and I call it the unfold. I unfold the soundscape and bring it into something that's more of a melody, and you're hearing things rising and growing. And the idea that I was talking with Ashley about was I wanted to I wanted to put it in a key that wasn't going to be sad the whole time. So I chose the key of C because I was like, I want to come out of this as something that is positive, and that major is like it just you feel that rise and that growth, and so it's a little more cinematic in a way. So yeah, so that was kind of basically the whole aspect of the song. I could go through like every single little thing, but it's like those little technicalities that like I feel like I would just bore people to death because it's like I'm sitting there and I'm just the song, that's a live track. I do live ambient music, so it's basically completely live. I think I only added just a little bit of something as a second layer, but what you are hearing is me sitting there for 20 minutes to reflect on what Ashley has created in this room. And she gave me a little egg that she gave me one of these little eggs, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. So I just like set it in the middle of the room just so I could like really think about the concept and think about what I was doing. Um, and I definitely just like that night, definitely just kind of cried my eyes out just because it was a lot. It's just like you're just, I don't know, we all go through pain, we all go through a lot of problems in our life. And um, I I come through from a family that comes from a lot of pain. So it's like to reflect on every single one of those things, you're like, oh my gosh, like you can't have just like a 5 minute song. Like it can't be that short. Like for me personally, it needs to be so much longer. So yeah.
So real quick, so the show, we built this podium that feels like a piece of furniture, and on it we have. So he had asked me to write a poem, which I did in like 2 minutes, and I was like, he's like, we need it because we're going to do the track in a bit different way. So I wrote it out as much as possible and sent it to him. But it encapsulates the whole show. So if you read the statement over here, it kind of gives you context for where it came from. Basically, I've told you all tonight. And then the poem is understanding the essence of the show and where it comes from in a visceral way. And so it's sitting here and it's punctured so to understand pain a bit more. But the QR code at the bottom is the whole score. Because I really want it, and that's like the whole thing that in our conversation, like I really want it to be free. So I want people to be able to come in and take one and leave. So if they can't physically buy a piece and get to live with something, a piece of work that can like encapsulate stillness and pain and like all of these nuances, that they can at least leave with art. They can at least leave with the essence of the show between the poem and the sound score. And so, yeah, we figured out how to do it. So whether you have whatever platform you have, even if you have nothing and it's on YouTube still, so that everyone can get to listen to it for free. But it really, and if you guys come back, it really helps with headphones for sure.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah,
completely
the
different
headphones.
experience. And then just to walk and watch, just kind of I was gonna say watch the work because it does move if you're like here in daylight with the light, but and listen to it all, and it helps a lot. But yeah, it was amazing.
You're awesome. Thank
Thank
you.
you. In that, yeah, so I asked also Gundy to talk because we're talking about collaborations. A lot of people are not for collaborations in the visual art world, and I found them to be very generative things between ideas and conversations, and they snowball into lives of their own. And so I also view, so I got the privilege to collaborate with Drew in this. And I also view curatorial aspects as a collaboration because I don't really have any say once I give over all of the work. And so it really comes down to how whoever is doing it, but Gundy in this instance is living and responding and engaging with the work that I've been pouring myself into. And so you're removed from it, but it's this like invisible conversation. And I feel like it's incredibly important. I felt very honored.
When people bring artwork to me, I don't necessarily always want the entire story, which I know sounds bizarre, but I need to see all the artwork in my space and feel it, and I like sit with it, and I look at each piece, and I just figure out what it's trying to say to me as a viewer, because I'm the middle person between the artist who's like, this is what this is what that is, and the viewer who sometimes is like, I don't know what it is, or I see something completely different. So I'm trying to, blend those two worlds together. So I sit there and I try and figure it out. And with Ashley's show, I mean, it's stunning, it's beautiful, and very emotional. Um, and so for me, what I chose was to kind of divide the black and the gold. Um, just view from my bed made me think of, anybody. We've all been there. We've all been sick and ill and whatever, and you're just lying there thinking like staring at a wall and looking at this darkness, and then slowly, the sunlight comes up and the shadows start to play, and there's lightness, and there's all this beauty, and so this goldness here is just so enveloping. Like I just love coming in, and it's just like this beacon of light, and it's comfortable and it's meditative. Anyway, that's what I came away with it, and which is why I curated it kind of half and half. I like to try to be a little like the last paragraph of your novel for artists. I like to be like kind of bring it all together. That's what I try to do.
I have always loved things that have transcended time. So even when I was a kid, I liked objects. I liked the thinginess of object, like objecthood, if we're going to get into theory, but like just like all the baggage that comes along with materials. So I loved like when I would go to my grandmother's house or just anyone's house, and I would see something and I knew that it came from a different time or a different culture, and it's moved and had all these different lives. And now it's sitting in my living room. So I feel like our houses are never just our houses, and our things are never just our things. They're never just functional. If you let them be more than just functional, even if they were just made and they came from a factory, like the understanding that people went into the time to make something that would reward you in some way, so in your life. And so I love the texture of furniture. Very specific. I love chairs. I love chairs. I love the fact that it's other than standing, it's our and laying down, like standing, laying down, sitting are our three primary like modes of existence. And so the footboard is from my great grandmother, and so I love being able to engage with that and have something that's been passed down in my family this long, and to value that. And I can, like, that's a whole other thing in and of itself. But then chairs, um, like can't, like they hold you. They hold you when you're not even aware of them. And so it felt like this assumed, if they feel like this assumed thing of support. And so for me, it really lent itself well, other than, again, just like the visual association. Philosophically, it felt like it lent itself really well to understanding how we're supported by so many different people and so many different things when we are just living and we don't realize it until we usually become broken. And then we realize we didn't, like, if you break your legs, oh, I need chairs to sit in. But I love the texture. I love everything about them. I love that wood is, again, it's one of those fun, for all of us nerds, origin materials that's coming and going and makes life sustainable. But yeah, for me, it feels like everyone's stories. They feel like stories. But I didn't say it at the beginning, but like I think, and have any of you guys heard of like the Moth podcast? Yeah. So my favorite, I love one of like their primary goal is one of my favorites, where basically healing occurs through radical storytelling, and furniture feels like that's what it does. And so that's what the whole show is about. But yeah, I would say that. And then just again, charred remains of homes. It held so many people. They housed their like vitrines, and that so many people's lives are held in them. And so for them to burn down and for me to go and reclaim them. And when you're standing in front of something like that, you're standing in the middle of other people's lives and they don't even know it. But the fact that our lives are so generative and we oftentimes don't realize it. So yeah. Pre-concussion, part of my identity was having really, really good memory. Like I could remember things like places, times, things, and what actually transpired. And when that went away, it was again a layer of my identity just gone. And so I had to come to terms with the fact that and you'll hear it if I'm in a conversation with you, I'm like, I'm pretty sure that that's how that is. And I'm like, and so there's a contingency now based on my memory. And I would refuse to tell a lot of people, if I wanted to be taken seriously, that I'd had a head injury, because I felt that it would undermine everything I was saying. And so I think coming to terms with the fact that memories were lost and that parts of my life I don't know if I'll ever get back, but that I still lived them, it kind of pushed me into a realm of physicality. Like I'm physically looking for things. And so when I get stuck or like that artist block, I will like sketch down ideas or I read. But I go to antique stores, I go to flea markets, I go to people's, like anywhere I can find old things, because it puts me out of context with furniture, especially when it's really old. Like I'll find things from like the 1800s. I'm like, I have no clue what this is. But everyone in the 1800s would have known what that is. And so it disassociates me from the context of things, and I can just appreciate their form. And it helps me kind of come to terms with how beautiful things are because they are, and not necessarily with what they were meant to be. And so yeah, it's been tricky, but the healings come because I've been able to come to terms with aspects of the fact of not knowing. Because I listened to a podcast today, and one of the artists, he was talking about the best advice he was ever given, and it was basically your intuition is a muscle, and it needs to be worked as much as any other thing if you want it to be good and of value. And so part of kind of leaning into the show was just that things feel important, the objects, furniture feels important. So when it does, I don't necessarily know why or when it will happen. Because sometimes I'll have ideas, I'm like, this is super important, and I'll write it down, and then I won't do anything with it for 5 years. But if it keeps coming up, then I know it's valid. So like that's like the baby stages of how I respond. But also I try and work the muscle when I go to furniture places or when I go to antique stores, because I'm just going and I'm just looking. And if something's like, I'm important and I don't know why, sometimes I'll leave, especially if I can't afford it. That happens a lot. But then it keeps coming up. With the white paintings specifically, they came about because of the theme of the show, where I realized I was talking about all of my experiences, the light on the wall, and then I wasn't talking about the walls. And that the walls are what was enclosing me, but also keeping me safe. So there was this dual purpose. But I really didn't want them to be anything that they weren't. And I was really trying to figure out how to do that. Like originally, I was like, maybe I could just go get drywall and cut that out. And that's what might happen with some of my paintings later on. But I was like, I loved the fact that these are the things that make up drywall, that make up your wall that you're not aware of, but they're holding it all together. And so they felt like the assumed parts of a wall. And so instead of just putting drywall up there, I felt like if I could highlight those things, the things that are keeping things together, but I didn't change the names. And I tried to orient them, like where the borders are at on some of them are where light happens on the walls. So I've got like, if you guys haven't been around, I've got west wall, south wall, north wall, east wall. And so, yeah, that was, they felt really important, but generally I try to ask what question. Like if I like something, then I ask, well, what is it? And so people that don't like art or don't know how to engage with art more specifically, I tell them, like, instead of going on to like this whole lecture, I'd be like, basically your intuition is valid. Like if you walk in and you don't like something, that's fine, it's valid, but just ask why. But instead of, I stopped telling them to say why, and I'm like, we'll just ask, well, what is it? And then that opens up a different level. And so, because I use the same tool in my practice, I'm like, if I like it, instead of asking why, just ask, well, what is it? And like, if it's a wall, well, what is a wall? And so then you start to understand boundaries. And then you start, well, what are boundaries even, if they even exist? Because nothing's ever solid. And you start to get into like philosophy. But there's just so many layers in the world the more you ask, well, what is it type of questions. And so I feel like all of the pieces are like the intersection of asking that type of questioning, along with listening to that weird intuition thing of something's important, I don't know why. And so then these things are born sometime eventually in life. I feel like I had like the sister piece to the hold me piece, this egg vitrine right here, I think is what really allowed. I think that was happening. I didn't know what to do with this piece, this footboard piece, and I've been holding on to it for a while. That was important, and this was important, and I didn't know. And then I was making these egg pieces, and I started realizing I was really interested in breaking them after they were made. And so then I was like, what is that about? And so that all kind of, I think, a lot like push things into what they were. But yeah, that, and then trying to figure out how to make Black paintings, because it's so process orientated and it's so intense and they're so big, even the small ones that are narrow and thin, these big huge vertical lines on the wall, but they're taking all of the parts of our landscape and our story that live on the horizontal, and then they're putting it into the sacred space of the vertical. So it felt like just moving things around. So that helped me, I think, just allow them, because they're so simple, allow them to be everything that they are and not to try. But yeah, they were good for me. Definitely compositionally, because you're aware, if you guys draw, you have to know where to put things and what is important. And so process of elimination becomes really big. If you're drawing a whole narrative through people's bodies, you have to draw the viewer into very specific parts of the whole composition. And so that helped me figure out what was important in an object. And like, this is important and this needs to be where someone looks. And then you have to ask, like, well, why do they need to look there? And so it unlocks a different type of narrative. And then, yeah, it will always be something I love. But it was a huge revelation for me. I was trying to make compositions of people's bodies, something that for me, that they weren't. Like, when I came to the realization I wasn't really interested in human form as much as human experience, I was trying to, like, so hard to, like, make these big, gorgeous graphite drawings of people's bodies, into telling stories. And I was starting to, like, pull symbolism, like let's add this type of object in the drawing because it symbolizes this, and let's add this type of thing into the drawing because it symbolizes that. And I realized I was interested in how honest a story could be. And so that, full circle, you guys, back to that Solowit quote, when I realized they weren't really real objects. And so, and again, it kind of transpired because I physically couldn't draw as easily. And that pushed me into a lot of trying to figure out what materials say as they are versus representing them in any other way. But yeah, so hopefully between the music and the titles and the show that was beautifully curated by Drew and Gundy, you guys have a poetic experience that feels honest. But Anyway, thanks for coming out, you guys. I really appreciate it.